Ma'am, with all due respect, the cockpit is for professionals. Perhaps you should find your seat and let the men with the actual flight hours handle this. The words, dripping with a condescending certainty, sliced through the tense cabin air. First Officer Kyle Vance, all crisp uniform and youthful arrogance, stood as a self-appointed gatekeeper at the threshold of the flight deck. A few nervous passengers, desperate for any semblance of authority, managed a weak, sycophantic chuckle. They laughed, but the woman he addressed, a figure of unassuming grace in her late 50s, did not. Evelyn Reed offered no retort, no flicker of indignation, no change in her placid expression. Her gaze remained fixed on the frantic flight attendant, her body language a study in profound calm amidst the rising tide of panic. She simply stood, a silent question in a sea of exclamation points, her hands held loosely at her sides, not clenched in anger, but relaxed with a patience that seemed almost geological in its depth. The hum of the Rolls-Royce engines on the Boeing 777, a sound that had been a comforting drone for the past 6 hours over the Atlantic, now felt like a ticking clock. The captain, a veteran of 30 years, had slumped over the controls, the victim of a sudden and catastrophic medical event. The initial, hushed whispers had grown into a palpable wave of fear that washed over the 300 souls on board. A call had gone out, the desperate last-ditch question that is the stuff of Hollywood thrillers. Is there a pilot on board? And through the aisle, this woman had come. Not with a swagger, not with a proclamation, but with a quiet, deliberate stride, her simple gray cardigan and sensible shoes a stark contrast to the unfolding drama. But when Admiral Charles Callahan, seated in business class and on his way to a NATO conference in Brussels, saw her stance, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift of weight to the balls of her feet, the way her eyes scanned not just the flight attendant, but the subtle torsion of the fuselage, the way her head tilted as if listening to a frequency no one else could hear, he felt a jolt of recognition that defied logic. He saw something that Vance, in his blinding prejudice, could not. He saw a posture forged not in a passenger seat, but in a cockpit ejection seat. He saw a calm that was not passive, but predatory. It was the calm of a professional who had seen the abyss and had not flinched. The younger pilot, however, saw only a woman, older, civilian, and therefore, in his narrow worldview, an amateur, an inconvenience. His derision was a shield for his own burgeoning fear, his voice a tool to project a control he was rapidly losing. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction, and that respect is earned in the silence of action, not in the noise of assertion, type competence below. Vance's dismissal hung in the recycled air, a monument to ignorant assumption. He continued, his voice rising in volume as if to physically push her back down the aisle. Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm, really. It's a nice thought. But this is a $30 million piece of equipment, a complex system, not a Cessna you fly on weekends over your lake house. The responsibilities here are immense. We have procedures. We have protocols. What we don't have is time for a civilian to play hero. His words were a performance for the benefit of the cabin crew and the nearby passengers, an attempt to reassert a chain of command that was fracturing before his eyes. He saw her age and registered it as fragility. He saw her gender and registered it as inexperience. He saw her simple attire and registered it as a lack of standing. Every single assumption was a brick in the wall he was building between her and the cockpit, a wall he believed was protecting the aircraft but was, in fact, endangering it further by dismissing its only hope. Evelyn, however, did not engage with the performance. Her focus remained absolute. Her silence was not empty. It was a vessel, holding a reservoir of experience so vast it required no announcement. It was the silence of a master artisan observing a flawed apprentice. She listened to the pitch of the engines, a subtle change that only a handful of people on the planet would recognize as the precursor to a compressor stall. She felt the minute vibration through the floor, a tremor that spoke of imbalanced thrust. She was not processing Vance's insults. She was processing a torrent of sensory data from a machine around her, her mind already miles ahead, running checklists that existed only in the most classified of flight manuals. An anaphora of calm defined her. Calm in the face of arrogance. Calm in the face of systemic failure. Calm in the face of imminent danger. While Vance spoke of procedures, she embodied them. While he postured with authority, she was the source of it. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Maria with 20 years of service, saw the chasm between the two. She saw the brittle panic in the first officer's eyes and the deep, unshakable foundation in the woman's gaze. In that moment, she made a choice born of instinct and experience. She ignored Vance. "Ma'am," Maria said, her voice a respectful whisper, "can you help us?" Evelyn's reply was not a boast or a promise. It was a simple, declarative sentence, delivered with the flat finality of a command. "Yes, get me in that seat." The cockpit door hissed open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Alarms blared in a dissonant symphony of failure. Red and amber lights flashed across the console, painting the two empty seats in the colors of emergency. The captain was gone, already moved to the galley by the crew. First Officer Vance, his face pale and beaded with sweat, was frozen, his hands hovering uselessly over the controls as he stared at a cascade of error messages on the primary flight display. The autopilot had disengaged, and the massive aircraft, now a wounded giant, was beginning a slow, almost imperceptible bank to the left. Evelyn Reed moved past him with a fluid economy of motion. There was no hesitation. She did not ask for permission. She slid into the captain's seat, her movements practiced, rhythmic, and utterly devoid of panic. The worn leather of the seat seemed to recognize her, to conform to her posture as if welcoming home a long-lost master. Her hands, steady and sure, began to move across the instrument panel. It was not the frantic searching of an amateur. It was a dance of immense precision, a choreography of competence learned over tens of thousands of hours. Her fingers didn't just press buttons. They found them with an intuitive grace, each touch a deliberate and calculated action. She strapped herself into the 5-point harness, the clicks of the buckles a percussive counterpoint to the wail of the alarms. Her feet found the rudder pedals instinctively. Vance could only stare, his torrent of arrogant words having dried up in his throat, replaced by a choking disbelief. He watched as she bypassed the master caution alarm with a single, decisive keystroke, silencing the most jarring of the sounds. The cockpit fell into a state of near silence, broken only by the hum of the avionics and the now audible sound of Evelyn's calm, even breathing. Her eyes scanned the entire array of instruments, not in a line, but in a practiced triangular pattern, absorbing a flood of information with an inhuman speed. Engine 2 was showing complete flameout. Engine 1 was vibrating outside of all tolerable parameters, its thrust dropping precipitously. A dead stick landing in a 777 at night over the ocean. The thought was so terrifying, so far beyond the realm of possibility, that Vance's mind simply refused to process it. It was a scenario pilots trained for in simulators, a nightmare scenario that always ended with a button press and a coffee break. It was not supposed to happen in reality. Evelyn's hands moved with a surgeon's precision. With her left hand, she gripped the yoke, her touch light but firm, instantly arresting the aircraft's slow roll and stabilizing its descent. With her right, her fingers danced across the overhead panel, her movements a blur of practiced efficiency. She initiated the engine shutdown procedure for the failed engine number 2, her voice calm and measured as she verbally confirmed each step for the benefit of the cockpit voice recorder, a habit so deeply ingrained it was second nature. Engine 2 master switch off. APU start. Vance watched, mesmerized. The woman he had dismissed as a weekend hobbyist was navigating the most complex and dangerous in-flight emergency imaginable with a composure that bordered on serene. She was not just following a checklist. She was anticipating it, her actions flowing in a seamless sequence that spoke of a profound, almost spiritual connection to the machine. The second engine, the one that had been vibrating violently, now began to scream, a high-pitched metallic shriek that signaled its imminent, catastrophic failure. Before Vance could even process the new sound, Evelyn's hand was already moving. Engine 1 fire handle pull. Bottle, discharge. She had diagnosed the problem, initiated the fire suppression system, and begun compensating for the total loss of thrust in the space of 3 heartbeats. The 777 was now a glider. A 300-ton, multi-million-dollar glider, falling silently through the night sky. The deafening silence that followed the shutdown of the second engine was more terrifying than any alarm. It was the sound of impossibility, the sound of a final, irreversible commitment to gravity. In that silence, Evelyn's voice cut through the tension, not with panic, but with pure, unadulterated professionalism. She keyed the microphone. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she said, her tone as level as if she were ordering a cup of coffee. "Transoceanic Flight 732 is dead stick. Total engine failure. We are at flight level 310, position 48 degrees, 32 minutes north, 30 degrees, 10 minutes west. Requesting immediate vector to nearest suitable runway. We are declaring an emergency." The air traffic controller on the other end, a seasoned veteran at the Shanwick Oceanic Control Center, felt a cold dread wash over him. He had never, in his 30-year career, heard those words spoken in that sequence. A heavy airliner, dead stick, over the middle of the Atlantic. It was a death sentence. But the pilot's voice, it was unnervingly calm. Too calm. He looked at his screen. The nearest viable strip of land was a NATO naval air station on an island in the Azores, a speck in the vast ocean, a runway designed for nimble fighter jets, not for a wounded behemoth like a 777. The glide ratio was theoretically possible, but it required a level of skill and precision that was almost mythical. Flight 732, the controller's voice cracked slightly. Nearest suitable is Lodge's Field. Can you make it? Evelyn's reply was instantaneous, stripped of all uncertainty. Affirmative. Give me a heading, as she banked the massive aircraft. A perfect, energy-conserving turn. Vance finally found his voice, a strangled whisper of pure, unadulterated awe. "Who are you?" She didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, on the impossible task ahead. Her only reply was to the air traffic controller, her voice a steady beacon in the terrifying darkness. "Lodge's Tower, Transoceanic 732, is on final approach." Gear down, the plane descended through the night, a silent ghost falling from the heavens, its fate resting entirely in the steady hands of the woman in the captain's seat. The landing was not a crash. It was an arrival. A feather-light touchdown so perfect, so impossibly gentle, that the passengers, who had been bracing for a violent, bone-jarring impact, felt only a smooth, firm kiss of the runway, followed by the roar of the tires on the asphalt. The aircraft rolled down the center line, perfectly aligned, coming to a stop with hundreds of feet of runway to spare. In the cockpit, the silence returned, a profound, deafening silence filled with the weight of a miracle. Vance was weeping, not from fear, but from a sense of awe so powerful it overwhelmed him. He was in the presence of something transcendent, a level of competence he had not known was humanly possible. The legend had begun. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles painted the cockpit in strobing blues and reds, their sirens a distant, muted chorus. The ground crew at Lodge's Field, a hardened team of Navy firefighters and medics accustomed to F divided by a -18s with landing gear malfunctions, stared in stunned silence at the colossal Boeing 777 parked flawlessly on their runway, its engines quiet, its fuselage unscratched. It was like seeing a blue whale beached in a swimming pool. It was simply too big, too out of place, too impossible to be real. The main cabin door opened and the jet bridge connected. As the shaken but unharmed passengers began to deplane, a figure in a crisp navy dress uniform bypassed the usual channels and made his way directly to the flight deck. It was Admiral Charles Callahan. He had observed the entire descent from his seat, not with the terror of a passenger, but with the critical eye of a career aviator. He had felt the perfect, energy-managed turns. He had noted the flawless alignment with the runway, achieved without the aid of an instrument landing system for a commercial craft of this size. He had recognized the signature of a master, a ghost from his own past. He stepped into the cockpit, and his eyes fell on Evelyn Reed, who was calmly running through the post-shutdown checklist as if she had just completed a routine flight. Vance, his face streaked with tears and shame, looked up at the Admiral, a stammering apology already forming on his lips. But the Admiral's gaze was fixed on Evelyn. His expression was one of profound, almost reverent respect. He didn't see an older woman in a cardigan. He saw a legend. He saw the pilot who had written the book on dead-stick landings for heavy aircraft, the one whose simulator sessions were the stuff of nightmares for young aviators at Pensacola. He saw the pilot who had test-flown experimental craft, so secret their very existence was denied. He saw the woman who had, on more than one occasion, brought back aircraft that were, by all rights, already ghosts. He took a slow step forward, his eyes locking with hers. "Valkyrie," he said, his voice low and resonant, the single word cutting through the quiet hum of the avionics. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a name spoken with the weight of history. Vance's head snapped up. Valkyrie? The call sign was a myth, a piece of naval aviation folklore whispered in ready rooms and officers' clubs. It belonged to a pilot from a generation ago, a test pilot of such legendary skill that their exploits blurred the line between fact and fiction. A pilot who had disappeared from the public record 20 years ago, their files sealed under the highest levels of classification. The Admiral ignored Vance's stunned expression, his focus entirely on Evelyn. He saw it now, the small, almost invisible silver pin on her cardigan, a custom-made piece she never flew without. It was a pair of naval aviator wings, but with a single, stylized raven's feather integrated into the design. It was her personal insignia, known only to a select few. "I should have known," Callahan continued, a slow smile spreading across his face. That final bank to bleed off altitude, pure poetry. Nobody else could fly a profile that clean. He turned to the now speechless First Officer Vance and the small crowd of emergency personnel and airport officials who had gathered at the cockpit door. The Admiral's voice took on the authoritative tone of command, the voice of a man used to shaping history with his words. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing in the small space, "you are bearing witness to a living legend. You believe this woman is a civilian passenger. You are mistaken." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words sink in. The narrator's voice seems to take over, overlaying the scene with a litany of truth, a staccato recitation of a hidden legacy. Unit, United States Navy. Rank, Captain retired. Airframes, over 60, from the F-14 Tomcat to the State, Route 71 Blackbird. Flight hours, 12,642. Medals. The Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 oak leaf clusters. The Legion of Merit. The Air Medal. Classifications. Chief Test Pilot, Naval Air Warfare Center. Lead Instructor, United States Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program. Top Gun. The Admiral's voice returned, filling in the final, most crucial detail. This is Captain Evelyn Reed. Her call sign, given to her by the first generation of pilots she trained, is Valkyrie. It was given to her because in Norse mythology, the Valkyries chose who would live and who would die in battle. Captain Reed made it her life's work to ensure every pilot under her watch, in every aircraft she designed and tested, came home. The emergency landing protocol for a wide-body aircraft with total engine failure. She didn't just execute it. She wrote it. He then turned back to Evelyn, his posture shifting from that of a superior officer to one of a humble subordinate. He drew himself up to his full height, brought his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect, ceremonial salute, and held it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "on behalf of the United States Navy and every soul on this aircraft, welcome home. It is an honor to be in your presence." The silence that followed was absolute. Vance's world had been completely and irrevocably shattered and rebuilt in the span of 30 seconds. The woman he had insulted, belittled, and dismissed was not just a pilot. She was the pilot. A quiet professional whose competence was so profound, so foundational to the very institution of naval aviation, that it had become myth. His arrogance had met its match not in an argument, but in an undeniable, earth-shattering truth. The story of Transoceanic Flight 732 and the impossible dead-stick landing at Lodge's Field did not just make the news. It became a modern epic, a piece of institutional folklore that spread through the global military community with the speed of a signal fire. It started in the control tower at Lodge's, with the controllers listening back to the audio recording of the event, their initial disbelief turning into a shared, reverential awe at the sheer, unadulterated calm in Captain Reed's voice. They replayed her transmissions over and over. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," delivered with the placid tone of a weather report. Affirmative. "Give me a heading." A simple acceptance of an impossible challenge. On final approach, a declaration of victory before the battle was even won. From there, the story leaped across oceans. It was whispered in the ready rooms of the USS Gerald R. Ford in the Mediterranean, where F-35 pilots, the inheritors of the sky she once dominated, fell silent as the tale was told. It was discussed in hushed, respectful tones in the dusty bars outside Nellis Air Force Base, where pilots who flew the most advanced aircraft in the world acknowledged a master of the fundamental craft. The call sign, Valkyrie, was spoken again, resurrected from the hazy past, and brought into the vivid present. It was no longer a myth about a nameless, faceless pilot from a bygone era. It was now attached to a name, a face, and a singular, breathtaking act of competence. The legend was not just about the landing. It was about the setup. It was about the quiet, unassuming woman in the gray cardigan. It was about the arrogant young co-pilot. The story became a parable, a powerful lesson in the danger of assumptions. It was a reminder that the most formidable weapon in any arsenal is not technology, but the quiet professional who wields it. The tale was a vindication of every quiet, diligent, and underestimated expert in every field. Her silence in the face of Vance's insults became the story's most powerful chapter, a testament to a confidence so absolute it required no defense. Why argue with a child about the nature of the sun when you have walked upon its surface? The ripple effects of that night extended far beyond the spread of the legend. They manifested in profound, personal transformation. First Officer Kyle Vance was subjected to a rigorous debriefing, not just by the airline and the FAA, but by Admiral Callahan himself. It was not a punitive process. It was an educational one. Callahan saw in Vance not a villain, but a product of a system that sometimes prized confidence over competence, volume over value. He made Vance listen to the cockpit voice recorder from the moment the captain collapsed to the moment the plane came to a stop on the runway. He made him hear his own panicked, arrogant words juxtaposed with Evelyn Reed's serene, precise commands. He made him feel the full weight of his own ignorance. The experience broke Vance, but it did not destroy him. It reforged him. A week later, he used his own money to fly to Pensacola, Florida, where he learned Captain Reed was temporarily consulting. He found her not in an office, but in a flight simulator, patiently walking a young, nervous female ensign through the complexities of hydraulic failure in an F/18. Vance waited for 3 hours, standing silently, until the session was over. When Evelyn finally emerged, he didn't offer a grand, dramatic apology. He simply stood before her, his posture stripped of all its former swagger, and held out his pilot's logbook. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet and heavy with a humility he had never before known. "Would you do me the honor of signing my logbook? Your signature next to this flight would be the greatest lesson of my career." Evelyn looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, and then a small, gentle smile touched her lips. She took the book, and under the entry for Flight 732, she simply wrote, "Competence is a quiet professional." She signed her name, Evelyn Valkyrie Reed, and handed it back. For Vance, it was not an autograph, it was a covenant. A promise to himself to spend the rest of his career earning the lesson she had taught him. The story also created its own artifacts. The air traffic controllers at Lodge's Field, in an unofficial but universally adopted act, named the specific curved flight path she took on her final approach to Valkyrie Glide, and at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, the transcript of her communication with the tower during the emergency, printed and framed, was hung in the main briefing room for all new aviators. It was placed directly beneath a large, bold-faced sign that read, "Assume nothing." Weeks turned into months, and the world, with its voracious appetite for new headlines, moved on. The story of Flight 732 faded from the front pages, replaced by the next cycle of transient dramas. But within the institution of naval aviation, the event did not fade. It crystallized. It became part of the curriculum, a permanent fixture in the cultural and educational bedrock of the service. The legend of Valkyrie's return was no longer just a story told in bars. It was a formal case study taught to every aspiring pilot. Instructors at Top Gun used the data from the flight recorder to analyze her energy management, her perfect control inputs, her flawless decision-making under unimaginable pressure. They used it as the gold standard, the very definition of what it meant to be an ace, but the lesson went deeper than mere technical skill. The story was used to teach character. It became a powerful inoculation against the disease of arrogance. Seasoned instructors would stand before rooms full of young, ambitious ensigns, men and women full of the same fire and ego that had once defined Kyle Vance, and they would tell the story. They would describe the unassuming woman in the gray cardigan. They would quote Vance's condescending words. Then, they would play the audio from the cockpit. They would let the stark contrast between loud arrogance and quiet competence wash over the room, letting the silence of Evelyn Reed's professionalism speak for itself. The moral was clear and undeniable. Your uniform, your rank, your gender, your age, they're all just superficial data. Your true worth is measured only by your actions in the crucible of crisis. Your competence is your only credential. The quiet professional, the one who does not boast, the one who does not need to announce their presence, is the one on whom everything depends. The story created a new archetype in the minds of these young aviators, the gray cardigan. It became a symbol, a reminder to never underestimate anyone, to look past the surface and search for the substance, to understand that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice least. A year later, under the warm Florida sun, a new wing of the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola was being dedicated. It was a hall devoted to the pioneers of modern flight, the test pilots and innovators who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible in the air. Crowds of uniformed officers, veteran aviators, and their families milled about, their voices a low murmur of respect and nostalgia. In a place of honor, next to a sleek, black experimental aircraft that was still technically classified, was a new exhibit. It was simple, a large, high-resolution photograph of a young woman in a flight suit and helmet, a confident, knowing smile on her face, leaning against the fuselage of an F-14 Tomcat. Her nameplate read, Captain Evelyn Reed. Below it, another plaque detailed her public service record, the litany of her incredible achievements. But it was the third item in the display that drew the most attention. It was a simple, framed piece of paper. It was the flight log of First Officer Kyle Vance, open to the page of his final flight with her. There, in elegant, precise script, was her signature and the inscription, "Competence is a quiet professional." Vance himself, now a captain with a different airline, stood in the crowd, watching people read those words. He had donated the logbook to the museum, believing its lesson belonged to everyone. He was a different man now, quieter, more thoughtful, known among his colleagues for his exceptional calm and his mentorship of younger pilots. He never failed to tell them the story of the day his world was upended by a woman in a gray cardigan. He was now part of her legacy, a living testament to the lesson she had taught him. The final speaker at the dedication ceremony was Admiral Callahan. He stood at the podium, not as an admiral, but as a fellow aviator, a keeper of the flame. He spoke of legacy. Legacy, he explained, is not a list of medals on a uniform. Legacy is not a name carved into a monument. Legacy is not a record held in a dusty archive. Legacy is the standard you set. Legacy is the quiet competence that inspires excellence in others. Legacy is the calm in the storm that gives courage to the fearful. Legacy is the steady hand on the yoke when all other hands are shaking. Captain Evelyn Reed's legacy, he concluded, was not just in the aircraft she flew or the protocol she wrote. It was in every pilot who now double-checked their assumptions. It was in every leader who now valued substance over style. It was in the enduring, powerful truth that true worth is proven not with words, but with deeds. Her triumph that night over the Atlantic was not just the saving of a plane. It was the timeless victory of demonstrated skill over ignorant prejudice. A story that would now be told for generations, a myth made real, a testament to the profound and enduring power of the quiet professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.